Good morning, guys. Welcome to the podcast. I've got a fantastic guest for you today, Rebecca Prejean, and she's coming out of Austin, Texas, the beautiful and fabulous city. And today we're going to talk all about crafting inclusive digital spaces. She helps neurodivergent learners really excel and succeed. And especially in today's society, we'll talk about holding space. And I'm really happy to have her on the show. So, Rebecca, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Chris. Excited to be here.
Yeah. So I know, introduce yourself, talk about your story, and I'm really excited to dive into the questions.
Yeah. Thank you so much. So my name is Rebecca Prejean. I am the CEO and owner of EB Graphics and Consulting. And you said exactly what we do. We create inclusive spaces and accessible spaces for learners in corporate America. That could be anything from creating videos, creating websites, auditing documents, creating other documents, animations, graphics, learning and development, the whole nine. We just make sure that everybody can use it. So we focus on people who have autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dysgraphia, and make sure that people can be successful in businesses and make sure businesses can thrive by supporting these folks. That's what I do, and I love it. And open to
Yeah.
change.
Yeah. And what's the inspiration behind it? Because I know the first time I heard of neurodivergence was probably late last year, and it's a really fascinating term and concept. And especially in our society today, it's really important to have a diversity of opinions and diversity of outlook and the diversity of discord. So, what was your inspiration?
For me, I won't lie to you, it was a very personal journey. I was working in learning and development long before I started actually focusing in on the accessible and inclusive space. And then I had a child, and he's wonderful. He's great, but he was diagnosed with autism at the age of 4, right around the age of 4. And we started to notice all of these struggles for people who needed support. We were trying to go through the school system and get him support, finding outside resources, all of these things. And it was really very hard and very difficult. And through that journey, I actually made the connection between what he was experiencing and what people in training rooms that I was in were experiencing, and how we were making very snap judgments about people and their capabilities and whether or not they can make it through training based off of our assumptions and our lack of awareness. And when I started to see that, I said to myself, we have a problem. We are throwing people away in essence. We are labeling them and we're not really giving them what they need. And when you give people what they need, you give them the support, they can succeed. It really has powered my mission going through because I want people to be able to succeed. But I also want to make sure when he's 18, 19, 20, and he is looking to work and he wants to work, that he has a space and people are aware and people are able to wrap around him and vice versa a little bit so he can be successful. But that can't happen if we don't create those spaces.
Yeah. And the follow-up question I have for you is in today's world, because I know a lot of people, they're fed up with the school system, and a lot of them, it's not teaching kids how to succeed. It's teaching kind of these irrelevant, topics, and a lot of parents are homeschooling, or they're not having kids, or they're foregoing traditional education. Where do you see this playing out? Because there's a statistic that only is 10% of people, I think maybe even less, that actually like fit in the school system. And you were talking about the school system and the corporate environment beating people down and labeling them as failures. So how can businesses integrate accessibility in their learning and development programs, and what are the benefits to the neuro individuals?
Companies, from my standpoint, even if I go back to the school standpoint, it really starts with the foundation. For them to really start incorporating the things, there has to be that foundational element of inclusion. And it can't just be inclusion based off of color, gender, all of those things. It really does have to be inclusion of thought. And more established companies, the ones that I've dealt with, the ones I've talked to in particular, we start off with workshops. So we start off with basic things, basic workshops that help them to understand what this really is. Because even as I'm talking to you, we're using terms, right? Like neurodiversity, neurodivergency, autism, and all these things. There's still the understanding that has to happen that some people don't know what this is. I went to a conference last week, ironically, and people would ask me, what do you do? And when I told them I'm an accessibility consultant, they looked at me like I had 5 heads. I just had no idea what I was talking about. And as weird to some people as that may sound, it reiterated to me that not everybody knows these terms. Not everybody understands what this is or why it's important. It's really starting off with something as basic as a workshop, as basic as implementing certain policies around just being open, around accommodations, around respecting, and you said earlier, holding space and what that looks like from a leadership perspective. And though this sounds like a lot of work, and I'm not going to lie, it is work, it's beneficial to businesses later on because these are the people who will help you innovate. These are the people who will help you problem solve in ways that you couldn't have conceived of because they think differently anyway. And these are the ways that you enhance productivity on your end as well. If you're wondering why your people aren't working as much as you want them to work, it might not be because they're lazy. It truly may be because they are having to take extra time to try to process the information that you've given them in a way that is not easily digestible for them.
Yeah, really interesting. And I really love this. For the audience, when you talk about holding space, that's also a new term that I've heard recently as well. What does that look like or feel like, or how can you describe it to the audience that is first hearing this term?
I always like to come at things from a very just human general approach, right? If we take disabilities out of it, if we take everything out of it and strip it down to just human nature, holding space in my mind is really just being compassionate. We're not asking you to be everybody's friend. We're asking you to just consider that maybe that initial feeling that you're having of, oh, this person said that and I don't like it. Hold the space for there might be something else completely different happening there, has nothing to do with you. And instead of just reacting to it, maybe taking a step back, holding space for that truth and approaching it different. Instead of, oh, you said that, I don't like you anymore. It's, you said that, are you okay? Is there something I can do for you? Is there something I can help you with? Is there some way I can support you? Holding space is really just about going back to the basics of human compassion, human understanding, human empathy, all of the things that we talk about today that people are like, the world would be so much better if people were nicer. That kind of thing is really what holding space is. It's bringing that kindness back and that understanding that we're all different. Nobody has the same story. I have a story that drove me to my business, but somebody else's story that drove them will be completely different. And that's okay. And it's just about really understanding everything's okay, even if it's different. You just have to hold a moment. Don't judge, don't assume, and try to figure out what's going on beneath the surface.
Yeah, I love that. Moving on, you talk about this is interesting universal design for learning and how does UDL principles can this concept be applied in the corporate setting to create more inclusive and effective learning experiences?
So, universal design in a nutshell is really just designing for as many people as you can. So stripping some things down. In the world of L&D, in the world of design, I love a fancy graphic. I love a fancy video. It's great stuff. I can spend all day talking about it. But for some people, that's hard. It's sensorially overloading. And so universal design principles actually strip some of that away and say, how can we design for the masses in a way that's still engaging? Still gets them where they need to be, gets them what they need to have, while remembering that again, people have differences. It can be something as simple as in an online training course, right? Usually people have videos, people have animations, people have all these different things. It can be as simple as having different options for people to take a test, having different ways for them to prove that they've mastered the skills that you're trying to teach them. That's really what universal design is. It's just stripping things down a bit and making sure that, again, we are reaching the largest amount of people that we can in the best way that we can, giving options. And again, understanding people are different, they learn differently. And you really have to speak to that, especially as a business owner, right? Because your employees are different. You can try to put them all in one box. It's not going to work. So things like UDL, things like these principles for your learning and design team are great. because you're again looking to empower your entire group as opposed to just maybe empowering like a small subset.
Interesting. Yeah, really. And then an adjacent or side question that I have for you is for companies looking to be strategic and to be have that cutting edge. How can hiring neurodivergent individuals with autism, ADHD, or dyslexia, how can that become a strategic asset for those looking to foster innovation and creativity?
They are everything. Like I said, they think completely differently. Good example. I'll use my 8-year-old. When you first meet him, he's a little bit shy, a little bit quiet. You wouldn't really think there's a whole lot going on there. I love him, but he is. He's just very reserved. And so people do tend to count him out. This 8-year-old, however, reads books at a fourth grade level. He does math at a fourth grade level. He can tell you all these different names of classical music pieces because he's into classical music. Folks that are on the spectrum have ADHD, they have specific things and gifts that can really push a company forward. Like I said, statistically, you can increase your overall productivity for your business by 30% if you support folks. You can increase innovation. I think it's around 20 to 25%. Because again, these people are thinking differently. And so they can think of ideas, they can think of products, they can think of features that somebody else may not think of because they're not seeing it in the same way. When you're thinking about this strategically, these are the people you want in the room, especially when we're talking about our economy nowadays and how people want to be first in the race of all the things. They want to make sure that their business is sustainable. They want to make sure they can go through a recession and not completely crumble. These are the people who can give you that edge and that little bit of something special to make sure that your business is around as we go through kind of some of the ups and the downs that are there.
Interesting. Yeah, because recently I've had a number of individuals with ADHD come on and talk about and just how they think and that creative spark. And so the other question I have for you is what is this acronym WCAG? What is that and why should businesses view this as more than just a compliance issue?
Great question. So when we talk about WCAG, it's Web Content Accessibility Guidance. So these are all the things that your website, your web presence should have to make it accessible for people who are on the spectrum or who have disabilities. And I'll answer it this way. Compliance is a real thing. And I never want to ignore that. I never want people to believe it's not important. Compliance is important, obviously for legal things. But going beyond that, I want people to understand part of the reason you want your website, especially to be accessible, is because people with disabilities still have money. They go online, they buy things, they are a large chunk of the market. And so if your website is not accessible, if the things that are on your website are not accessible, you have all of these walls of text, documents that are huge walls of text, reports, journals, all those kinds of things that are just nothing but text. That's not digestible. It's not accessible. And so if you're selling something, if you're selling a product, they're going to skip right over it. Not because they're not interested in your product, not because they don't have the money or it wouldn't benefit them, but because they can't digest what you're saying. Same thing about alternative text on imagery. If somebody's reading a screen reader and they're looking for whatever, and you don't have that, they're not even going to know that product is there. For business owners, it's important, obviously, to be kind, obviously for legal stuff, but also because you're hurting your business. You're hurting your revenue. And again, in the economy that we're in, can you really afford to lose out on possibly 25% of the market? Because that's what people with disabilities represent. They have buying power, and you should want to speak to all of your potential clients.
Yeah. There's so many directions we could take this conversation. And one of those is the future accessibility and corporate learning. And what trends do you see emerging in this field and in accessibility and neurodiversity? And how can businesses prepare for a future where inclusivity is the norm?
Future of accessibility. There's a lot happening there. There's different laws and things that are about to become very permanent. We've talked about WCAG guidelines so far. There are changes coming in the next year or two where your website will have to be accessible or it will become an issue legally and all other kinds of things. The future of accessibility in and out of the workplace is about to become a necessity. It's no longer an option. And I know people will be like, I feel like it's never been an option technically, but we've treated it as an option and it's about to not be, not just because of those standards, but because you have more and more people who are being identified as ADHD, as having autism, and they're much more aware of their rights. They're much more aware of their conditions. And that means that they're going to be that much more aware of what you should be doing as a business. They're going to have different expectations of you as a business, as an employer. I think that coming into the workforce, you have to prepare for them, or it's going to be problematic, not just from a legal standpoint, but just even from a productivity standpoint, from a business standpoint, and being able to really make your business as good as it can be. So the future for accessibility is endless and it's about to come to the forefront. I will also say AI is also going to be a huge component, I believe, when it comes to accessibility. You have so many different tools right now that are AI based for accessibility, and I just don't see that changing anytime soon. AI is here to stay.
Yeah, that's really yeah. I'm giving this presentation on using tools, AI tools for creators and how to grow and scale a media brand.
That's cool.
Yeah, really interesting conversation. And so, how can people find you and reach out to you? And obviously, have a personal as well as a really passionate motivation to see the most out of this. How can people reach you?
So people can reach me. Easiest way is going to be LinkedIn. Just look me up, Rebecca Prejean. I'm the first one that pops up. People can also reach me on my website, www.ebgc.net. And like I said, those two places are probably the best ways to reach me. I'm always available for people if they have questions, even if it's not a sale, because I know people will have questions. People want to know things, and I'm always available for that. So, yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And for the audience, let's thank Rebecca for coming on and really enjoyed this conversation. And be sure to give her socials a like and follow. And thanks so much for a wonderful conversation.
Thank you so much for having me.